For much of the 20th century, Venezuela was not considered a poor country. Within Latin America, it stood apart, not because it was more industrialized, but because it was unusually rich. Oil arrived early, on a scale few countries had ever experienced. By the mid-20th century, Venezuela had become one of the world's major oil exporters, earning more per person than several European economies at the time. Its capital looked modern. Its infrastructure expanded quickly. A large middle class emerged. From the outside, Venezuela looked like a country that had already made it. And yet, today, it is often cited as one of the clearest examples of economic collapse. So the real question is not what went wrong politically. The deeper question is how a country that became rich so early also became so fragile. To answer that, we need to look at the structure beneath the wealth. Venezuela's geography played a quiet but decisive role. The country sits at the northern edge of South America, with direct access to the Caribbean Sea. Its oil reserves lie relatively close to the coast, especially in the Orinoco Belt, making extraction and export unusually efficient. This meant Venezuela could integrate into global markets without first building a complex internal economy. Oil could move outward. Foreign currency could move inward. Very little else was required. From the beginning, the economy was global but narrow. Oil transformed the role of the state. Revenue flowed directly to the government, not through broad taxation, but through ownership and control of natural resources. The state did not need to rely heavily on its citizens for income. It did not need to cultivate a wide tax base. Instead, it became the main distributor of wealth. Oil income paid for imports, for public employment, for subsidies, and for ambitious social programs. This created the appearance of stability. Living standards rose. Consumption expanded. Urban life flourished. But beneath that surface, the productive base of the economy remained thin. At first, this model seemed efficient. Why develop difficult industries when oil revenue could purchase almost anything from abroad? Why invest in competitive manufacturing when imports were cheap and abundant? Over time, this logic reshaped the entire economy. The national currency strengthened. Imports flooded domestic markets. Local producers struggled to compete. Manufacturing weakened. Agriculture declined. Even basic food production shrank. Venezuela became increasingly dependent on imports, not because it lacked land or labor, but because oil made self-production unnecessary. As production narrowed, dependence widened. Businesses learned that success depended less on efficiency and more on access to the state. Public employment expanded. Subsidies became permanent. Consumption was sustained through distribution, not through rising productivity. As long as oil prices remained high, this system appeared to work. Growth did not require reform. Adjustment could always be postponed. Oil absorbed pressure that would have forced change elsewhere. But oil prices are volatile by nature. They rise sharply, and they fall suddenly. When prices were high, the system expanded easily. When prices dropped, stress appeared immediately. Foreign currency reserves declined. Imports became harder to finance. Budget gaps widened. Yet the structure of the economy had not changed. There was no diversified base to fall back on. No competitive export sector ready to compensate. The system had been designed to distribute wealth, not to adapt under constraint. Faced with shrinking revenue, the state tried to preserve the existing model. Controls were introduced to stabilize prices. Spending continued despite falling income. Money creation filled the gap. These measures delayed adjustment, but they also distorted supply. Shortages emerged, not because goods disappeared globally, but because access to them collapsed domestically. Supply chains broke. Informal markets expanded. What looked like sudden chaos was the visible result of long-accumulated imbalance. At this point, instability became unavoidable. Inflation accelerated. Real incomes fell. Confidence eroded. But none of this happened overnight. The collapse was not a single event. It was a process. Each external shock weakened the system further. Each recovery became shorter. Each downturn became deeper. Without productivity growth, Without diversification, resilience steadily declined. Leadership changes did not reverse this trajectory. Different governments managed the same underlying structure, sometimes expanding it, sometimes straining it. Personalities influenced speed, but not direction. The economy remained centered on oil revenue, state distribution, and dependence on imports. Structural conditions mattered more than individual decisions. Over time, external pressures intensified. Global energy markets shifted. Production capacity deteriorated. Access to capital tightened. Each shock exposed the same weakness. When oil revenue faltered, the system had nowhere else to go. Instability became chronic, not because of a single mistake, but because the design itself offered no alternative path. It is tempting to explain Venezuela through ideology alone, but that explanation falls short. Countries with very different political systems have experienced similar outcomes when they relied too heavily on a single resource. What makes Venezuela extreme is not the presence of oil, but the absence of economic diversity. Oil delayed hard choices. It postponed the need to build competitive institutions. It reduced pressure to reward productivity. Early wealth replaced long-term learning. This leads to the central paradox. Venezuela did not collapse because it lacked resources. It collapsed because its most valuable resource made the rest of the economy optional. Oil created prosperity early, but weakened adaptability over time. The richer the state became, the less urgent reform appeared. And when conditions finally changed, the system could not respond. Today, Venezuela is often described as a country in crisis. But from a structural perspective, it is a country living with the long consequences of an economic model that never evolved. Instability is not an accident. It is the predictable outcome of a system built to distribute rents rather than to develop productive capacity. Venezuela's story fits into a broader pattern. Africa struggled to industrialize because conditions never aligned. Latin America industrialized early but stalled. Venezuela shows what happens when early stalling combines with extreme dependence on a single source of wealth. History does not punish countries for being rich. It punishes systems that cannot adapt when circumstances change. Venezuela's geography gave it oil. Its economy organized around it. And when the world shifted, the system had no second foundation to stand on. This is behind the map.